Welcome to Argumentative Indians, a platform committed to the dissemination of knowledge through debates and discussions on issues that matter. Well, it is often said that where literature is silent, archaeology speaks. This is particularly true in the case of early Indian history, where 90% of Indian heritage lies buried. And prehistory, as we know it, has little or no literary records. Moreover, as the script of the earliest known civilization of India remains undeciphered, even as decades pass since its discovery, what and how do we know about the earliest inhabitants of the Indian subcontinent? What do we know about the material culture, their sociopolitical and religious practices, their knowledge of science, and their relations with other contemporaneous civilizations? Well, I'm your host, Dorin Bora, and today we have with us archaeologist Disha Ahluwalia. Disha is a field archaeologist currently pursuing a PhD at MSU Baroda. She has worked in the field for a decade, including at sites like Binjor, Sinauli, and Rakhigarhi. Let's get to know more about the ancient Indians through a conversation with her. A very warm welcome to our platform, Disha.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So, we'd like to start this conversation by asking you, who can we call the early Indians? Like, who can we term as early Indians or the ancient Indians?
Um, it's a very interesting question because the moment you say the term early Indians, people will start asking me about the ancestry and about various other questions, and it'll dwell into a very different conversation. But before that, if I have to define who ancient Indians or early Indians were, I would take back to the time when anatomically modern Homo sapiens, that is our species, that we have migrated out of Africa.
Right.
They are the early Indians. Okay, because today what we see as a political boundary of India, the demarcation that is India, was not existing for millions and millions of years ago. It was, we don't even know what exactly was the demarcation or the boundaries or the borders were like back then. Even few hundreds of years ago, like 70 pre-independence, the continent sort of looked very different. But look at it now. So one can imagine how it would have been thousands of years ago. So I would start the journey of early Indians from the time out of Africa migration of Homo sapiens, which was about 50 to 70 to 50,000 years ago. They are the ones who basically, started this trend, and there this continuity also that we see. Be it in the regional cultures or be it in the civilization of Harappan, or which we know as Harappan or Indus-Valley civilization. So I would term early Indians as the prehistoric man who migrated out of Africa, and followed by various other migrants and waves of migrations, and also, not only one way migration, but dispersal in different directions. They are the early Indians.
So, what time frame are we talking about when we say this?
About 70,000 to 50,000 years ago. That is the probable time period for the second or the third migration out of Africa of Homo sapiens, anatomically modern Homo sapiens, that is our species. And post that, we have about 7,000 BCE, the farming community coming up, the early farmers. And then, of course, about 2,600 or 3,000 BCE, you have the Harappan civilization, the urban phase of Harappan civilization coming up. So if I would say start tracing the journey of early Indians, I would obviously start from the Homo sapien migration out of Africa theory, right from there.
So, if we follow this theory that we came from Africa and we settled here throughout all thousands of years, then are we calling the Harappan civilization? Are we saying that it has origination, an indigenous origination? That these were the people that were settled here in the Indian subcontinent, and these were the ones that built up this civilization.
I think everyone would be knowing about the ancient DNA analysis from Rakhigarhi, which is an Harappan site, right? And now I have to say this right now to people that what the DNA genome sequencing of that particular sample state is that there is a direct ancestry to the Iranian hunter gatherers and herders, but not to the steppe farmers. Okay, so you have to understand there are farmers and then there are hunter gatherers. Okay,
Right.
even in the eastern Iran, if you look at the genome spread or the studies that have been undertaken by scientists, uh, there you can see that from the Anatolia, the early farmers, from where the early farming community was first noted, the evidence of it is first dated. The ancestry is also not directly linked to Eastern Iran. What we have in India is the ancestry dating it back to linking it back to the Iranian steppe hunter gatherers and herders, not the farmers. So we have an interesting sort of a situation here, because the question that you're asking me is basically trying to asking me to trace thousands of years of journey, right? Homo sapiens, that is our species, is still in existence, right? So of course, somewhere or the other, the descendants of those early migrants, the prehistoric man, have somewhere or the other led to the emergence of various small towns, or probably led to small emergence of small regional cultures across the subcontinent, right? And then from there we have the emergence of early farming. So when I say the African migration, then there is also the migration of later hunter gatherers, also about 12,000 BCE or prior to that. So people are migrating all the time, but it is really not fair to say that a wave of steppe farmers were the ones who led to the early farming community in the subcontinent. And then of course came the next stage, that was the urbanization. We have to understand that Indian our culture in the subcontinent is very diverse. It is obvious that the genetically also there will be a lot of diversity, and we see that even today. So there is no linear evolution anywhere in the archaeological data or anywhere else. Even in the genetic data, you don't find linear evolution. There are various different branches of evolution happening, simultaneously. So cultural evolved simultaneously. Some people continued practicing hunting, gathering, whereas some established or built big cities, right? So this is always a continuous process, and even today we see big cities, small cities, villages, right? Even tribes existing, coexisting with each other. So that is what scenario would have existed thousands of years ago as well.
So, when we talk about these smaller cities and bigger cities, or villages, maybe, or rural landscape, then the one, what will you call the first civilization of sorts, or or were there other areas of interest in this, urban landscape or rural landscape? What will you call it? Like in ancient India, the time period that we're talking about here.
The time period of civilization is about 2600 BCE all the way to 1500. This is the urban phase. But if I look at the chronology of Harappan civilization or Harappan culture, which pre-Harappan or early Harappan culture, somewhere starts about 5500 BCE. That is the pre-Harappan. The before the Harappan characteristic starts taking shape and they became more prominent. Pre to that, there is
Do
another
we have
phase.
do we have names for these pre-Harappan cultures, or
There are various regional cultures. Okay, like excavation of Harappa, there was a Ravi phase. There's a site called Kot DG, which is again shows a very regional pre-Harappan, early Harappan characteristic. You have Nal. So there are different regional sites which have their own characteristics. And then comes the urban phase, that is from 2600 BCE to about 1900 to 1700 BCE, where you have this urbanization, or some parameters, some points, some things which have unified people, practicing these traditions, practicing the town planning, practicing the use of seals and Harappan script. etc., all of them under this umbrella of civilization. So civilization, in a very simple term, is nothing but where you see drainage, weights and measures, standardized brick size, town plannings, and all of this coming in place, which makes which suggests that people who were residing in these towns were urban in nature. Then they were evolved in terms of their town planning. They were not only living in battle and daubs now, but they're living in a very organized built cities as well. So that is when the civilization character comes up. And once the civilization, of course, the characteristic starts diminishing slowly and steadily, you again have a very phase called a regionalization phase, where again the characteristics or the tradition, or people going back to the roots and going back to the regional characters and taking shape and basically diffusing into the existing regional cultures as well. So there is a whole evolution that you can see
Right.
in the
So,
early civilization. So there is a evolution from early farming all the way from forming characteristics and traditions, and in material culture that we see, which will slowly and steadily from 5000 BCE to 2600 BC will give the people residing in various cities a term, or bring them under this umbrella of civilization. So there is a slow evolution and diffusion of cultural traits that you can see in cultural material as well.
So I have two questions here. First is that when we're talking about the Harappan civilization, there are other terms also that people use to describe it, like the Indus Valley civilization or Harappan civilization. Some have even actually called it the Saraswati civilization. So why do we have such differentiation in nomenclature? And the second is that what is the extent of this civilization? Like how far does it go to? Like in India, or we also know that it's in Pakistan. So what is the exact extent, or will it actually be so that we will find more sites that will broaden the extent?
There's a possibility of broadening, of course. If nothing is set in stones in archaeology, you never know what we might find buried under a site. We don't know that yet, but the extent of the civilization as of today, or accepted demarcation of the Harappan civilization, is right from Makran coast all the way till Ganga Yamuna Dwab. From north, you have sites in Jammu area, and all the way till Damabad in Maharashtra. So this entire area, which is very large, it's thrice the size of Mesopotamian civilization and also Egyptian civilization, one of the biggest civilizations in the ancient world. And to answer your question, also, I would want to tell people that there are also sites which are beyond these boundaries, these set boundaries. Remember that these boundaries are set by archaeologists. We don't know the script. We have not read the script. We don't know exactly what their units look like, or they're divided into geographical area or as per different criteria. We don't know. These are the boundaries set by archaeologists on the basis of certain parameters, suggesting that this particular site, if it has this characteristic, it comes under the head of Harappan civilization. This particular site, if it does not have fulfill all the entire checklist, is not Harappan site, but it's contemporary to Harappan civilization. So we have sites which are beyond the realm, the marked demarcation of Harappan civilization, as well as across the subcontinent also. Coming to the nomenclature, it's a very interesting thing, and often have issues with one term or the other. The first the city that was where this civilization was noticed was Harappa. In 1924, it was the correspondence made by Sir John Marshall, who was directing the excavation at Harappa, and of course, subsequently at Mohenjo-daro. That when he published a newspaper about his findings, he got a correspondence with contemporary archaeologists who were working in Mesopotamia and Sumer, and then he understood, and also the archaeologists who were working at the site understood that they are not excavating an early historic site. They are excavating a prehistoric site which is contemporary to the civilization such as Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilization. And then they extended the scope of the investigation to different other sites, and there also they started finding similar evidence, which concluded Sir John Marshall in 1924 that they have struck upon one of the oldest civilizations of ancient world. And now the antiquity of ancient India is pushed back to 3rd millennium BCE, which was earlier thought to have had a date, about 3rd century BCE. So this was a very important landmark in terms of archaeology of the subcontinent, and also the history of archaeology in the subcontinent. And
Disha, quick
when
question.
yeah,
Sorry. So, can you help us differentiate between what is prehistory and what is like you're differentiating
yeah.
it like with
So,
early history as well?
prehistory is where you don't have written records.
Okay.
Harappan civilization is an interesting example of proto-history, but at times we also put it in prehistory because there is a script, there are written records, but we are unable to decipher. So there is prehistory where there are no written records, but you have ecofacts and artifacts, that is archaeological data. You have proto-history, which is Harappan civilization, where we have written records, Harappan script on seals and boards and etc., but we are unable to decipher it. And
Why is it so difficult though to decipher
uh,
the script? Or has there been like any progress in it?
there are few theories, but I don't think anyone has reached a consensus as to where they should lean towards. I mean, like, people are working on it, of course. And the reason why we are not successful is because we don't have any continuation in the script. For instance, I'll give an example of Brahmi's decipherment by James Princip. When
Concept,
he
yeah.
was deciphering Brahmi, and of course also later on Kharoshti, he knew Sanskrit, right? And he was aware of the script which was later in antiquity, then Brahmi. So Brahmi and then later Sanskrit. He knew, and Devanagari, he knew the later script. So he slowly traced his way back to Brahmi. So he did not go from Brahmi to the later script, but he moved back to the earlier
Okay.
script, that is Brahmi. And that's how he was able to decipher it, because he was able to trace the evolution of each letter in the script, and also how it's pronounced. And that's how he was able to do it successfully with both Brahmi and Kharoshti. But look at Harappan script. You have Harappan script and straight away you have Brahmi. You have nothing to fill the blank. So how can you trace your way back from Brahmi all the way to 3rd millennium BCE? It's a long journey, and it's very difficult to fill the gap till we find archaeological data. So we need to we are unable to find any archaeological data which can fill the gap so far. So that's a reason why we are unable to decipher the script. With the Rosetta Stone also, it's multi-script inscriptions. It's not one script. So if you know a little bit about one script, you can easily go about and deciphering the other, take the help, and then do it. So unfortunately, with Harappan script, it's very difficult to do so because we have an archaeological gap, which an epigraphical gap, which hopefully, I don't know when we will be able to fill. Maybe when we'll start looking beyond the set narratives, maybe then. And when we start engaging in dialogues, I think it's very important, because people are working on decipherment of Harappan script, but we don't sit. There are no conferences. We don't sit together, and archaeologists and people, epigraphists don't sit together and, talk about the issues. So
Right.
I hope in near future we will be able to come to a certain conclusion, at least a testing hypothesis, if not, a conclusive, any conclusion, but something which will sort of give us an answer for a while, a tentative approach, perhaps. I don't
So
know.
Disha, you also mentioned that how the Harappan civilization is 3 times the size of the Mesopotamian civilization and the Sumerian civilization. So, are these civilizations contemporary to each other? And there are also some people who have called the Harappan civilization the handiwork of the Mesopotamian civilization. Like they are the ones who came here, and because there are so many similarities. So can you help us understand this?
No, Harappan civilization is not handiwork of any other civilization. In fact, I would like to say that there was a lot of cooperation and there was a lot of exchange that was happening of material good and also of idea. There are inscription, Sargon inscription, where you know that there were colonies there of people from Harappan civilization. You know, Meluha people going from here, the traders who are residing there. So you know that they are trading with each other. And I don't think it's a handiwork of any other civilization. They are very much contemporary. They are trading with each other. There is an exchange of goods happening, and we don't know what else, of course, because a lot of it is in intangible material, intangible data. So we don't know. But if you look at the archaeological data, the material culture, you would see that a lot is going from the Indian subcontinent to West. They are, exporting wood, the finished produce are going there, the beads, and a lot of things are going, are being shipped off to West. So I really don't think so, but they are very much contemporary. Even their fall is very much contemporary in timeline, if I look
Okay.
at the chronology. Because Bronze Age civilization across the old world or ancient world collapsed approximately at the same time, but various different regions. We don't have one uniform reason for the collapse or everywhere, but you can see a trend of declining of Bronze Age civilization, few hundred
So
years here and there.
so here I have 2 questions. First is that long distance trade requires a lot of planning or a lot of centralized, what you can say, administration. So do we see this kind of administration happening in the Harappan civilization for such long distance trade? And then again we have the decline that you talked about for the Bronze Age civilization. So we'll come to that later, but first let's address this. How is it possible for them to conduct such long distance trade?
um, See, long distance Harappans, uh, they were traders. And when I say Harappans, I'm talking about the mature Harappan period, above from 2600 BCE till 17 or 1900 BCE. I'm not talking about pre or post right now. When I'm talking about Harappan civilization in this context at the moment, they were basically traders. They knew how to create a trade matrix, and that's what they did. If you look at the spread of Harappan cities, towns, small cities, big cities, urban centers like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Rakhigarhi, Dholavira, and you have ports like Lothal. If you see their spread, you see that they know where the raw material is available, and they know where they have to ship. And between them, there are also small rural Harappan settlements as well. So the notion that all Harappan cities were urban is false. It's not true. I have read many historians saying this, that Harappans were basically not agro-pastoralists, and agro-pastoralism came afterwards. It's completely wrong, because the percentage of rural to urban is different when you calculate, or when you see Harappan cities and Harappan towns and Harappan settlements being spread across the entire realm of Harappan civilization. They have created the matrix. For instance, from Dholavira in Kutch, if they have to send off, pillar fragments, limestone pillar fragments, all the way to Mohenjo-daro, they will be sending to the nearest next city. From there, the nearest next settlement, perhaps, which is not a big city but a small settlement, right? And then from there, it'll go all the way to Sindh, to Mohenjo-daro. So they have created this network Okay, not only within the unified or the realm of the civilization, but also with the contemporary cultures. So that's how they were able to go long distance. Also, we know that they knew how to build ships, because you see that in the seals, the impressions or of the seal of the ships, we know that. So we and also there are epigraphical evidence, inscriptional evidence from the Mesopotamian and other contemporary civilization, where they are saying that the Meluhans are coming in big ships, which are
The
very, very
Meluhans
big.
are the
The
Harappans,
Harappans,
right?
they're coming in big
Okay.
ships with the goods. So we know that they are also doing not only the land route, they're taking the land route, but also the sea route. And then because of that, we have a lot of Harappan material culture available in the Oman and the Gulf also. Because if you open the map, you'll see from Gujarat, you will have to cross the Gulf to go towards Central Asia. And that's the route that they have taken. So we know that now. We have enough evidence to say that they were really good traders, and they really went distance. And if a person, a craftsman from Gujarat, is not going with his beads, but there are manufacturers, and then there are people who are exporting it also, who are taking it. So there is a distribution that you can see in job as well.
So while we talk about distribution of jobs, so can we call it like the division of labor or stratification of society? What will you call it?
There is
Was there any
certainly
some sort of
stratification.
stratification?
There is certainly stratification of society on the basis of what I think it's a basis of profession and the work. Okay, because you do there is citadel. Of course, the citadel term is very colonial, but still, then there are settlement within one city. There are few structures which are on an elevated ground. Then there are cities which are on the middle, not so elevated ground, and then there are lower towns. So citadel, middle town, lower town. You have this division of various big cities of Harappan civilization, be it Dholavira, be it Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. At Rakhigarhi too, in the recent excavation and also the previous excavations, be it by ASI or by Professor Shinde, all the excavations certainly tell us that they are occupying different regions, different types of people are occupying at different period of time. For instance, the Mount RGR1, where we have found a plenty of debitage and finished and unfinished beads. So we know that this particular area was for lapidary, because there are furnaces, there are debitage, finished, unfinished goods, and then there are structures also. So looking at that, in all the evidence, be it structural artifacts and everything, we know that that particular settlement, that particular mound, was for the artisans, right? Another
Okay.
of our excavation, which is Binjor, which you mentioned in the introduction, is an interesting site. It's a very small site, okay, but it's a craftsman's village. It's basically people are involved in metallurgy, copper object making, because we have found about over 250 hearths and furnaces in one area. So, and also we have found slags, crucibles. We know that they are smelting, they are manufacturing goods. We have also found a lot of industrial waste. So that particular small settlement, they know that they are engaged in particular craft, in particular activity, be it metallurgy, be it lapidary, or anything else. And then they are manufacturing these goods, giving it to the nearest big settlement, and then selling it to the big settlement, and that is now then going across various corners of the ancient world and ancient India. Also, the shell is coming from Gujarat. So we know there are sites in Gujarat where in one trench they have found a lot of shell debitage, which shows that they are getting the shell, making shell bangles or various other shell products, and then they are selling it off. So that is what is happening. Of course, there is a division on the basis of work and profession, for sure. There is some sort of stratification. If there was no stratification, you will not find in Dholavira, where Citadel has its own small enclosure, then the middle town has its own enclosure, then the lower town has its own enclosure. So you can find, some evidence which will point to that nature. But the
So,
stratification is not like how our society is
right.
stratified. It's based on work.
But then this stratification again also brings me to the question, was there a stratification or hierarchy in the political sense also? Like, what was their administration like? Because if we talk about citadels or these divisions, then there might be this notion that some people that were important were living in these higher placed citadels, and some not so important were living in the lower towns. So,
Yeah, there has to be some division on the basis of, some will be affluent and some will not be that well off. Some are craft persons, some are traders, and some are living in big citadels. Of course, there is enough evidence which suggests a point to that particular point, but we don't know exactly who were the head of the who was heading the a particular city, or there were divisions made, or there were a centralized power somewhere else. We don't know that yet, because there is not enough evidence, but one can see that it has to be controlled in some way or the other. I can't tell you about the political scenario because there are a lot of gaps in the archaeological data. We don't know, like the people usually give example of the priest king,
hmm,
the sculpture, the priest king, which is on your poster. It's a very small sculpture. It's not big. It's this much state-eyed figurine, which Sir John Marshall called as the priest king. Now, I often, when I talk about nomenclature, I often think about whether he's a priest or a king, because both denote a very different sort of occupation. A king is a king, but the priest is a religious and a head of a religious institution. So it's a very because you have to see by 1921, 20s, 30s, most of the British archaeologists were concentrated in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and there the system of the pharaohs and everyone, it's very different. So they are taking that particular concept, imagining that this is what happens in the ancient world, and taking it and bringing it to the Indian context and saying, see, look, this is a priest king. Of course, that particular sculpture must be belonging to a very important individual, but we don't know whether it's a priest or a king. It's a
right.
speculation, just like dancing girl, not dancing at all. Okay. So I think there is a need to look at various terms that are given, be it to the civilizations term. We were talking about how it came up to be the Indus Valley Civilization by Sir John Marshall, when he declared to the world, like, look, now India's past is pushed back to third millennium BCE. Later on, when India and Pakistan, they were partitioned and two countries were recreated, that point when Indian archaeologists and others, of course, the European archaeologists and everyone, came to a consensus that Indus Valley is a very limiting term, because the sites are now no longer limited to one valley, one river valley, that is Indus. They are spread across various river banks and river systems, such as the Ghaggar Hakra. They are in Gujarat, because post independence, by 1970s, 80s, exploration results were being published, and now people knew that the extent of the civilization is so wide. So that's when archaeologists like A. Ghosh and everyone suggested that the most sane conclusion will be to call it or name it after the first site where the civilization was discovered, that is Harappan Civilization. That is following the archaeological contention. But a lot archaeologists don't, they still follow the Indus Valley Civilization, and some follow Harappan Civilization, and now we have a new trend of calling it a Saraswati civilization, which again is wrong, because you are giving the river system, when you are naming certain thing, you name it like for instance, we named that talk, right? Our emphasis was on ancient India. That's the reason why
Right.
we've added that term. When you're naming anything, you're emphasizing on a particular thing. When you call it a Indus Valley civilization or a Saraswati civilization, you're saying that either the point of origin is on either these two river valleys, and then diffusion happen either from Saraswati or from Indus. And then you're also saying that geographically it's limited to these particular river valleys, which is nowhere true when it comes to the broad archaeological data that we have. So I will. I, like many other, have a lot of confusion and disagreement when it comes to the names, such as Indus, so Saraswati civilization, and all of that, and also calling it priest king or dancing girl. And then coming to the question that you originally asked, I think we have to still look, excavate sites horizontally and excavate sites so that we fill these gaps in the archaeological data. And with the recent Rakhigarhi excavation, Dr. Sanjay Manjul, who's the director of the excavation, ASI, and the entire team, we are aim for this excavation was to basically answer these questions with the help of Rakhigarhi, because Rakhigarhi is the biggest, one of the biggest Harappan site, and now we can't go to Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, and Dholavira is fully extensively excavated. So Rakhigarhi is the only site in India that we have that can answer a lot of these questions that you're asking.
So, since you have actually been in Rakhigarhi yourself and excavated that site, so what are the features that you have seen in Rakhigarhi? And you also mentioned mature Harappan phase. So, what are these features, and do you see these mature Harappan features in Rakhigarhi?
Rakhigarhi is a site which we know was inhabited for a really long period of time.
And also,
Before,
can you tell us where exactly is Rakhigarhi?
Rakhigarhi is located in Haryana, about 180 kilometers west of Delhi. And if you Google it right now, you'll get the precise location because it's a protected site, protected by Archaeological Survey of India. It's a very big site. There are about 7 archaeological mounds, not one mound, but 7 archaeological mounds. And as per Professor Shinde, there are actually more mounds that can be within the boundary of Rakhigarhi city, the urban center or the city of Harappans. So we don't know the exact extent, but at least there are 7 big mounds, and each mound is sort of separated and connected to each other. So you can, if you go to Rakhigarhi and Google it, you will see one mound, and then there is a plain, and then the big mound, and then again. So you can see where is different tilas, across the landscape. It's a very big site, and it's been a pleasure and an honor to be at that site and to be able to excavate a major part of the site. See, you've asked me a question about mature Harappan. Rakhigarhi is one site, just like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Dholavira, just like the other big 4 cities. It was inhabited for thousands of years. And when I say this, I mean that there were early Harappans. Some case people have also speculated. The early excavators suggested that they are pre-Harappans. So you have pre or probably early Harappans, which is pre-urban phase of Harappan civilization. Then you have the urban phase, and then you have the post-urban phase before the site was abandoned. So you will see within the stratification, over thousands of years of accumulation in the strata, in the stratification. So it's extended over wide, a very large area. It's the largest Harappan city in the eastern domain, that is within the political boundaries of India. And when we were excavating Rakhigarhi, we had a lot of questions in mind this season when we excavated in 22. We wanted to know how these different mounds are basically connected to each other. A lot of questions were answered with the help of previous data, previous excavations data that we have. But we knew and we know, and everybody who is working in ancient, working in archaeology, and especially with the Harappans, they know there are a lot of questions that still need to be answered. And our aim was to basically answer those very specific questions. And in our excavations, since it's public now, that data, I can say, in on your platform, that at one of the mounds we have found structures such as, burnt brick walls, drains, the ones you will read in books that have been found way back in at Harappan Mohenjo-daro, just like that. And at one of the localities and operation area where we were excavating, there was a about 18-meter in length, a mud brick wall, which was enclosing a structure where lapidary activity was being undertaken by people. So, and then it was, that particular, the wall was on the street, and then the street is, it connects, and it divides into four parts. That is, at right angle it turns,
Right
and then,
angles, right.
so all of that I have read as a college student. I've seen that on site being uncovered in front of my eyes. So Rakhigarhi, to me, I think it holds a lot of potential. We just hope that it will give more clues and answer a lot of research questions that you have asked today, and also the ones that we also ask, ourselves when we are talking about Harappan and the Harappan civilization.
So, since we know that you've also excavated other sites, can you tell us about other sites that have given you such revelations about the civilization, or any other site that you've excavated, and that may or may not be related to the Harappan civilization?
I have excavating another Harappan site. Which I've mentioned, Binjor, which is a very interesting site. It's a very small site in comparison to, of course, Rakhigarhi and others. But within one small site, you can't imagine the kind of antiquity and the evidence one can get. Like it was my first excavation, and it's very close to India-Pakistan border. On the banks of right bank of river Ghaggar in Rajasthan, in Sri Ganganagar district. It's I remember that when it was my first excavation way back in 2013. And when I started excavating that particular site in my trench, I found bricks. And for a student of archaeology who has only done explorations and was only worked on, research material and secondary data, finding something in a primary context was a very different feeling. And from there to excavating the fortification and then working for 3 seasons, the kind of antiquity we have got sort of opened my eyes. I remember we would ask our supervisors and directors a lot of questions as to where are the streets, because we are always taught that Harappans need to have a particular town planning. Harappans need to have streets, that, that sort of will connect the different structures together and different areas of the city. There has to be small by lanes, big lanes, because that's what you read in the reports, and you've been taught. But when we started excavating that particular site, we knew that that's not the case. That's not the case with all the Harappan settlements. Emphasis is on the settlement, big, small, rural, urban, semi-urban, whatever. It's not the case, because there were no proper streets. There were no, there was no big structures. But what we found within 30-meter by 30-meter area, about 250 hearth fire, so furnaces, and all of that, everything ready for us to excavate. And the evidence was so clear to us, with the kilns and furnaces, which are over 200 in number. It was evident that this we have struck upon a workshop, a Harappan workshop, in a very primary context, where they are manufacturing copper objects. Okay, and that particular site was really opened my perspective, and really, very early on in my career, I was made aware to the fact that the set narratives are not what, we need to push them. We need to see what goes beyond. So start looking beyond what is there. A lot of time people, students, when they come to the site, they say that Harappans need to have this, because that is what we read in books, right? There's a checklist, a laundry list, and this is what Harappans mean. But that's not true, because archaeology, we're dealing with humans, and humans usually don't follow the checklist all the time. We have our own agenda, we have our own things, our own tradition. So that is one side which has really opened my mind. I have worked extensively in the post Harappan phase as well. Other than Sanali, I'll come to Sanali later, but I have been working on painted graveware culture for about 6 years now, and my doctoral research is on that particular topic. What I have been working on is to see how Ghaggar basin, the Ghaggar Akra basin, has sort of changed from Harappan to PGW, how the landscape changed. Because painted grey ware using communities have been highlighted in the archaeological context a lot, but we still don't know a lot about them in the Western Indian context. So they are the post after Harappans, they are the first culture that emerges in the scene. So I've been working on that. I have worked on a few sites in the Ganga Yamuna Doab, including a site called Barnaba, which is, Professor Lal believes it's what Varnavat was in Mahabharat. So this was Barnava in what is it's known today as Barnava. But at the site, it was the first time that I've excavated a multicultural site, about 15 meters of deposit, which span from about 1100 BCE all the way till 10th century AD. So you can imagine such a long span and long chronology at the site. So right from ancient all the way to medieval period. And of course, I've worked at Sanali, which again yielded chariots, weaponry, and coffin burials for the first time in the Indian archaeological context.
I'm so sorry, my internet got disconnected right now. So I couldn't listen to 10 seconds.
I was talking about Sanali. I was talking about the last slide. I was talking about Sanali, where we have found evidence of chariots.
Right. I was going to ask about that. That Sinali had great attention for, the
it should gain
solid
all
disc
the
wheel
attention for
cards.
the right. Yeah, it should gain all the attention for the right reasons. For the right
So tell us about it. Tell us about it.
This Sanali is a very interesting site. Then it's located in Ganga Yamuna Doab. It's very close to. It's in Bagpat district of Uttar Pradesh, very close to Delhi. At Sanali, it was a chance discovery. The excavation was supposed to be only for sample collection, but our team, and ended up excavating 3 chariots, full-size chariots in a burial context, along with legged coffins. So the coffins have legs, and then it's a box coffin with legs. For the first time, and in the burial pits, there were also weaponry buried with the dead. So, looking at the various contexts, we know that the Sanali excavation gave us the very first example of chariots, which was not available in the Indian subcontinent, in Indian context. Weaponaries in the stratified context. Earlier, weapons have been found in a non-stratified context where it could not be linked to archaeology or archaeological site. For the first time, we were able to link it to a proper context. So weapons with the dead and the chariots made it very clear to us that we are excavating the warrior class of ancient India. And the dates, of course, which is very much contemporary to Harappan civilization.
So when we're talking about chariots, are we talking about horse-pulled chariots? Like, do we think that these were pulled by horses?
Very interestingly, a couple of days ago, I was reading a paper by Jonathan Markenoyer on wheeled vehicles of Harappa. So he has written a paper where he is basically elaborating various evidence of wheels and vehicles from different archaeological contexts of different sites, specifically at Harappa. And also, somewhere he mentioned that we are still stuck, with 19th century perspective, early colonial perspective, where people, the moment you say chariots, they're linking it to irons, and then they're linking it to horses, and then they are, if not, if the two are not there, they will say it's not a chariot at all. What we need to know that it's the first and the only example of chariot. We don't have anything to compare it with. You understand this? When the Marshall excavated, published the findings from Harappa, he other archaeologists had substantial evidence to help him compare. There were seals being found at Mohenjo-daro, at Sumer, and all of that. So he could make a comparison and come to a conclusion and say, okay, we are stuck upon the earlier civilization. But with chariots, we have no other evidence. We have no other evidence so far. So, yes, of course, it's very valid to assume that they are going to be horse driven. And it seems like, but since we don't have any archaeozoological or paleozoological remain, it is very difficult for any one of us to conclusively say that, yes, they were horse driven. But by looking at the pole and the yoke of the chariots, it seems that they were pulled by a horse instead of bulls.
But there was Natwar Jha and N.S. Rajaram, who had proposed that horses were used in or they were present in the Harappan civilization, and based on that, I think the movie Mohenjo-daro that was out by Ashutosh Gwarkar, I think that movie also has depicted the use of horses in that period of time. And but then there are also historians who have completely debunked this theory of the presence of horses. So now you're saying that there is a possibility of these chariots being pulled by horses. So how do we actually come to a conclusion in this? And also, is it right to depict that in a movie like this?
It's not right. It's not right at all. It's not right, because that's what I said. Till I don't find a horse skeleton, a full horse skeleton, I can't say it. With even the archaeologists working with us in our team, you can't say with one bone that it's a horse or it's a donkey, because they belong to the same species. You need to have certain markers which sort of differentiate the two, the horse and ass. So you need to have either the full skeleton, or you need to have some other bone, maybe a jaw, where you can have the DNA samples in the a petrous bone or whatever. You need to have something which sort of give us a conclusive answer that yes, horses were used. But then there are a lot of other studies being conducted where it suggests that they were indigenous horses, not the Arabic horses. The Arabic horses, of course, came later, much later. The ones that you see today, just like even in the cattle, there is a lot of genetic admixture. Whereas cattle have been interbred, and then now the present day cattle is very different from the ancient cattle. So it is a possibility that they might be using an indigenous species. Which, because in Himachal you do have evidence of perhaps mule, and you have donkey. So there's a possibility, but I or any sane archaeologist will not come to a conclusion and say 100% there is horse. There are horse bones are found from reported from few Harappan sites. But then the context is very important here. Whenever we come to a conclusion, we have to look at the context. If the context is not there, it's usually that particular evidence is discarded or not used for further study. So we need to have a proper context to the bones. And we also now are aided by science and technology. We can very well do an ancient DNA, and that will really give us a very conclusive answer. We just hoping for a horse skeleton, or perhaps a skeleton. Now, till that is not there, I think no sane archaeologist will tell you the horses were there. It's a question that it needs to be answered, only in the archaeological context with the bones, proper bones.
So there is a lot of discussion around how advanced the Harappan civilization was, or the Harappans were, how uniform their all their weights and how standardized they were, and how there was so much planning that went into it. So can you tell us a little bit about their knowledge of science, or how they did their everyday life, I guess, through their coins or through their burial practices, maybe? And how does that show into their art as well, if they had art?
They had art. They had their own way of art. They did not have big, this extravagant form of art. You don't find that, but you look at the beautiful painted pots. You look at the story that is depicted on pots. They are narrating the whole narrative in the pottery, and then you have seals, and then you have figurines. Of course, they have their own form of art. And in India, in ancient India, it's not only for Harappans, but the entire ancient Indian context. I would like to say that we don't have an example of extravagant art till a very later period. We have a very example of very subtle art, for instance, prehistoric art, and then coming up and then slowly, gradually moving on all the way to the Chalcolithic art. So art in India developed and evolved at its own pace, and has its own characteristics. A lot of people compare it to Egypt and Mesopotamia, but I always say that there is no need, because there are reasons which we don't know that led to this slow regional, much more gradual evolution of art in the subcontinent. So coming to your the question that you were asking me about how developed they were. If you look at the way they are building their cities or their towns or the settlements, there is some uniformity in terms of the brick size, right? The size might vary, but there has to be ratio 1:2:4. It can be 20 by 10 by 30 or whatever, but it has to fall into that ratio. You have to maintain that ratio. Plus, there are drains, there are covered drains. So, the example of covered drains is there. When, in modern Indian context, historical context, the covered drains are very recent. But look at Harappans, they had covered drains, they had soak pits at the end of the lanes. So at Rakhigarhi, we have found evidence of soak pit. So at the corner of each turn, they have put soak pits. Now, soak pits are big pots that from where the drain would sort of empty, and then they would keep emptying that, and then that is their process of sanitation. So we know that, talking about the technology, we know that they were the ones who came up with the bronze technique, right? Adding high tin to copper and coming up with bronze. They master the art of bronze object manufacturing. The beads, the carnelian and agate beads, they are spread across the globe. And they've been in use even till the very recent, even today. Khambad is known for their lapidary. So the way they are making those long carnelian barrel shaped beads, and they are perforating those beads, and then they're polishing it, all of that needs a lot of skill, a lot of precision, a lot of knowledge of heating at a right temperature. At Binjor, we do find there's a published paper also on this. At one of the furnaces, we have done a scientific analysis where we know that the temperature was at as high as about 1100 degrees Celsius. So they knew how to control fire. I have not seen one Harappan brick being either overbaked, underbaked. Even the mud bricks are sun baked, but they're so hard. I know, I work mostly with sun baked bricks. They're so hard that's very difficult for you to work. It's very difficult. You know that it's not just clay, but they have sun baked it so well. So they knew that plus the agriculture practices. We have enough evidence of plow. At Kalibanga, you have furrow marks. So we know that even though they are in the urban centers, they are also practicing agriculture. Their burial activities, the way the orientation is north-south of the body, and there has to be certain pots at near the head, and the way the offering that has been done, the elaborate way the burials have been the kind of buried objects that we get, the grave goods that we get, give us clear understanding that the Harappans were not just they were not they were very systematic, they were very knowledgeable, they knew how to utilize their immediate environment, how to exploit resources for their benefits and use them. Rainwater harvesting, so they are exploiting resources but they are not over exploiting them. They know that they are living in Kutch where they have to there is no nearest water source, so whenever there is high rainfall or there is surplus of water, they will store it in their reservoirs built around the city, and then they will use it with the help of rainwater harvesting system, which connects different reservoirs, wells and tanks in different parts of the city. So looking at all of this, that is the reason why Harappans are sort of separated from the rest of the India and Indian subcontinent, even in the contemporary world. These are the reasons why they are separated, because uh, they are they are creating certain unified parameters which are used across different cities in different geographical locations.
So, when we're talking about how advanced they were, there are also evidences, or I would say pieces of evidences, not many, that the Indus Valley civilization, or the Harappan civilization, I'm sorry, has yielded evidence of, surgical practices of, say, dentistry, or say someone has also some have also put forward that there was brain surgery that was performed. So can you tell us something about this?
There are one or two such example coming from northwest frontier,
Mehergar
the
also is
Mehergarh.
there,
Exactly.
right?
From there, examples are there, and I'm sure there will be more examples. We have not investigated on those lines, and of course, they were very much advanced. They were aware of how to use. We don't see. Point is, now I can't answer you very conclusively, because when I say they were using medicinal plants, I need to support that evidence with paleobotanical evidence, but then our investigation is so slow. Mehergarh, because it was extensively excavated and we know the cultural sequence of Mehergarh and of course other sites, that these, and there are a lot of burials at Mehergarh at different levels. There are burials, and the nature of burial also changes from time to time in different phases. So we do have evidence from there, but that is not enough to suffice that whether they knew about it and to what extent. Even if they knew about it, to what extent, we don't know yet. I think we need to wait and undertake various paleobotanical evidence and anthropological studies also to answer that. But of course, they knew um, somewhere or the other. If I just give you a blanket statement and not supported by science or evidence so far, I can tell you that they knew that how they have to sustain. One of the reasons why our species evolved and Homo sapiens, they are now spread across the globe, is because we knew how to survive. So survival of the fittest is what Darwin has propounded. It goes same with the Harappans also. They knew that they have to survive the harsh environment of Kutch, of changing rivers, drying rivers at Ghaggar Basin, floods of Indus. So they were aware that of their ecology, they were aware of the landscape, and accordingly they did come up with various methods, which of course is the reason why they survived for thousands of years, and they continue to survive.
I'm so sorry. My internet keeps disturbing a lot. I'm so sorry. I just missed 10 seconds, I think. So
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So what I was asking was that if they had such advanced knowledge and they know how to sustain themselves and there was a survival of the fittest, then why do we see, or how did they decline? Why did they disappear from, there was obviously maybe some gradual disappearance or sudden decline. What was it actually?
See, they didn't, the people, see, they, we have to now understand, like, there are people and there is a system, right? So people can, we, our species is very unique, right? We can mold ourselves in various situations. We might think we are rigid, but we are not. If given a chance, if we are forced by various factors, we will change colors, quite literally, right? So Harappans did not disappear, they diffused into regional cultures. The culture disappeared. You have to understand here. The people did not disappear. The culture that we know as, or we have labeled as the Harappan culture, disappeared because it could no longer sustain. And one reason is that the trade contact started to break, and there was a decline in the trade due to various factors. And I have mentioned earlier also in the beginning of our talk that Bronze Age civilization has a very similar collapse across the globe, across the ancient world. And more or less it has to do with this contact and the trade network that they have established. Now, when we were talking about Harappans, I did mention that they gradually evolved into urban character from early Harappans, and then you have the late, which is the de-urban. So you see how the evolution is happening from slowly from early farming, agro pastoralist society. They're becoming these urban because now supply and demand, the ratio is changed. Now there is a there is less land available for I think we lost each other for a while, didn't we?
Yeah, I
Yeah, I think. So I was just talking about. I was
I'm
just
so
talking
sorry.
about. No, it's okay. But maybe my connection. You never know. So I was just discussing how from early Harappan to mature and to late, there is sort of evolution and evolution of the whole
Mhm.
nature. From early farming, pastoralists, agro-pastoralists, there were some urban characters that were adopted or that sort of originated within the Harappan society, and that those characteristics evolved and developed over a period of time. And there was a demand from the West for the produce, for the products and the objects. So where there is demand and supply, business will thrive. The moment the demand is disrupted for various reasons, your economy also starts to sort of collapse or slow down, right? So on top of that, there was a major river system, that is the Ghaggar river, or which is largely known as the Saraswati river system, was collapsing. Saraswati, and which we know today as Ghaggar Hakra, was drying up. So a major part of the sites, major number of the sites, were being sort of abandoned slowly. Okay, they're being abandoned, and then the people started migrating to the nearest place. And when that is happening, there is also some environmental changes. Paleo environmental studies and paleoclimatical studies have suggested that there were some changes happening in the paleo environment back about 2000 2100 BCE, be it in the rainfall or in the temperature, all of that. And once all of that sort of uh, uh, happened at the same time, trade collapsing, environmental changes, Ghaggar drying up, it sort of demanded a change. And the change came in the form of late Harappan phase, where the Harappans are still carrying forward few characteristics, but they are no longer urban. And slowly, they sort of diffused into the regional characters and into the regional, societies. And so people didn't disappear, the culture disappeared. The culture sort of slowly disappeared and gave rise to a new culture everywhere, be it on the Makran coast, which is Afghanistan, be it today's Pakistan, be it today's, Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Gujarat, any part of Harappan civilization, if I have to name it as per today's political boundaries, anywhere. It sort of changed slowly and steadily. The culture disappeared, not the people.
Right. So, so far we've talked about the northwestern region of the Indian subcontinent or India, as we are talking about. So, can you tell us about some other settlements or cultures that were there simultaneously with the Harappan civilization in during this time period, like in the other parts of India?
So Harappans, there is never a linear evolution of culture, or there is no linear thing. There is no one linear scale. There are different scales, right? So if you have urban Harappans here, you also have the Neolithics at Burzahom, who are living in dwelling pits. And then you have the Chalcolithics. Now, Chalcolithics are people who basically using copper, but it's not bronze. And they are largely agro-pastoralists in nature. Having said that, even Harappans were agro-pastoralists. Majority of it turned into an urban, or a more trading sort of profession. But Chalcolithics are those who are basically agro-pastoralists. They are into farming and pastoralism, and they are using copper, which is not bronze. So the bronzing or adding tin, the metallurgy of adding tin to copper was not used on by them. By these people, they have their own culture. So Deccan Chalcolithic is very distinct as opposed to the OCP of Ganga Yamuna Doab. So there are regional Chalcolithic cultures also that were emerging at the same time as of contemporary Harappan urban Harappan phase. And then you have Burzahom, which is about the same period of urban contemporary to urban Harappans, which they were largely Neolithic, who evolved into, and then you have megaliths also that were existing all across the country. So you find not only one particular culture, but also different cultures. OCP is another name or another regional variant of Chalcolithic. It basically comes under the Chalcolithic period. OCP's full form is Ochre color pottery. This particular pottery was first excavated at Hastinapur and was christened by Professor B.B. Lal, eminent Indian archaeologist, at Hastinapur, at the lowest most stratum of Hastinapur. And at Saipai, at one of Professor Lal's excavation, he was able to link this particular pottery to the archaeological context and also to the copper hoard. Now, hoard is, as the name suggests, is basically large quantity of particular one type of objects found in one area. So copper hoard were found in isolation in different parts of the Ganga Yamuna Doab, and at Saipai they were first linked to the archaeological context. And Sanali belongs to this very family. So Sanali belongs to this copper hoard OCP family, contemporary to Harappan. So Sonali is again another example where you see a lot of Harappan influence also, but a lot of regional character also. At Hullas, another site which is in Ganga Yamuna Doab, you see the same nature. So we do see within the Harappan time frame, contemporary to Harappan, Harappans engaging with the contemporary cultures and settlements, and then there is an exchange happening in the domestic era also, not only with the West.
So, like moving forward from this time period, like of the Chalcolithic and the Harappan civilization, if we move forward, we come to the Rigvedic era, or what we call it as the Aryan age, maybe. So, why is it said that archaeology knows no Aryans? So, why is that notion there?
Because for archaeologists and also for me and many of us, we don't how can you say that these are Aryans? Till we find an archaeological evidence for it, we can't say that they were Aryans. And the time period that you're talking about is basically is the period of pre-second urbanization, that is the painted grayware culture. Aryans is, for me, is a constructed identity. It is not, because we know now that there is not one wave of migration that can possibly lead to the emergence of any culture. Never. It never happens. It's seen in archaeological data, even in the later period, also with the Kushans and and with other powers migrating in. You see that they migrate, but then they change or adapt some of the indigenous or regional characters. You know, the Kushan starts some, Huvishka is worshipping Shiv, whereas Kanishka is a Buddha devotee. So you see that change also in the early historic period. So it's very true that archaeologists know Aryans at all. We call them Aryans is because of because of the colonial perspective. B, because people way back few decades ago, because there was a gap in the archaeological data. That was after Harappans, people thought Harappans just died, vanished. And then comes another culture about 500, 600 years, which was painted grey ware. So, ye kaun hai naye log? So, painted grey ware, if I have to elaborate, PGW is again a type of pottery that was first found at Hastinapur, was named by Professor B.B. Lal, who, when he excavated Hastinapur in 1940s, 49 to 50s, he thought, because he belonged to Wheeler's school, he was Mortimer Wheeler's, student. He belonged to that school, and he's like, "Oh my God, a new type of pottery is here, which is very smooth, which is very well crafted, which shows a very unique, advanced pyrotechnology. So this particular grey pottery, though, has to come from outside." So who are these people? The possible way of linking it to Aryans. So he stated in his early writings about Hastinapur and PGW that Aryans were the ones who got PGW all the way via Ghaggar Akra to Ganga Plain, and then they are the ones who led to the Vedic culture, the Vedic age, right? But then after a few years, he retrieved that particular notion, and then he said the very opposing, uh, contradicting exactly, it was poles apart his notion that Aryans are nothing but indigenous. So Rig Vedic people, he didn't mention the term Aryans. I'm sorry, he never used the term Aryans. He said that the Rig Vedic people and the Harappans are the two sides of the same coin. See, we need to understand that the evidence to say either these two opposing notion is very less. We also need to understand that everything is not black or white. There are various other shades of gray in between that needs to be looked at before we make any conclusions. So the problem here is that the colonial perspective, the 19th century perspective, people, archaeologists like Mortimer Wheeler, Mackay, everybody, they came with the notion saying that there is dark age. Who else will fill the dark age? No, none other than the people migrating from the west. Okay, they are the ones in the dark age, but now we know that there was no dark age.
So have these archaeological discoveries of, say, painted greyware, or there are more cultures like the Malwa or Dorwe cultures also, have these helped, or like how has pottery, analysis helped in filling these chronological gaps that we're talking about?
See, the reason why Professor Lal is regarded so highly is because he was the one, after post-independence, was able to fill the gap with the help of archaeological data minus the scientific analysis. You have to remember that is a time, where we don't have radiocarbon dates. You don't have a lot of scientific aid in India. Even today, there's dearth of scientific aid to archaeologists, but still we are progressing at a very fast rate. The kind of labs and all established today, you have to remember that he filled up or created the chronology for North India with the help of pottery. The fact that he was able to differentiate between OCP and Harappan, and remember, he excavated Kalibanga, which is another very important Harappan urban center. He knew Harappan pottery and he was able to differentiate with the OCP, the ochre color pottery, and come up with the same conclusion that, see, OCP is a separate strata which is contemporary to Harappan but is different. He then came up with the PGW, and then of course contemporary archaeologists at that time came up with terms like northern black polish, which was linked to the Mauryaans at the early historical period. So the early archaeology of post-independent India, really with minus any scientific aid, really with the help of ceramic analysis, created this chronology of ancient India, this archaeological chronology of ancient India. But today, as sitting in 2022, going into 2023 in few days, I feel that that is a very strong foundation we laid for us, but we need to work ahead, we need to move forward. For instance, my own work focuses on PGW of Ghagar, a region which Professor Lal claimed was the route for my Aryan migration. Okay, he stated that the PGW people of that particular region were the early inhabitants, and then later on they moved slowly to Ganga Yamuna Doab. However, the analysis undertaken by me and the scientific excavations and the data that I have got sort of gives me a very different picture. So we need to understand that today we can redo or fill in the gaps with the help of science and other analysis and take this work forward. So of course ceramic analysis is very important. I have been working with ceramics for almost 6-7 years, still working, and I think we need to really up go forward to the next level of ceramic analysis with the help of thin section analysis, residue analysis, and undertake more scientific work than just doing more relative work or typology based work. So the work has been done. We need to still do a lot. We have to go a long way.
So apart from filling the chronological gaps, what more can pottery analysis tell us about, say, the material culture or, the dietary habits maybe?
The pottery can really give you a clue about everything. Pottery is the largest amount of antiquity that we get at excavation site is pottery. We don't regard pottery as antiquity because we're so used to seeing it. So we treat it as a nuclear waste, because we have to discard it and then it cannot be perished. So either or we fill our stock rooms with the pottery. But pottery is something which is maximum at at an archaeological site, which comprises about 80 to 90% of archaeological data from any excavation. It can give you it can sort of tell you about the psychology of the potter, because remember, pottery making is a process, and if you anthropologically, if you see potters, they have their own process. Each potter will have their own different process, which might differ minutely, but then there on a macro level it's all the same, right? And then making the shapes can tell you about what sort of what was the utility, and also about the sense of fashion if they're coming with a new style. So there is a little bit of artistic approach to it also. The painting is usually done by women today. Ethno-archaeological evidence clearly suggests. So if we assume that women or the young girls were involved in the painting of the pots in a potter's house, so you can imagine the wide, expanse of imagination and artistic evolution and development of people who are painting, the women painting those pots. So it can tell us about that a potter is an artist, because he knew if he's going to bake a particular pottery at 950 degrees Celsius and devoid that kiln of any oxygen, the pottery will turn gray. And if there is more oxygen than needed, then also the pottery might not be fine. So the reason we have various categories in pottery, fine, coarse, medium, etc., basically tell us that the potter know what he is creating. So he's basically creating from clay. He knows that the demand of a fine pottery is more, so he'll make more of fine pottery. He knows that if he's selling more of cooking pots, so he will make a more coarser pot, right? So it basically tells us about that. Secondly, if a pottery, if in pottery we have maximum percentage of big jars, cooking vessels, then we know that they are possibly storing a lot of grains, or they are cooking a particular thing in a particular sort of a particular pot. Then once we have that, if we do lipid or residue analysis in a pot, which is a very recent undertaking in Indian context, we can know what fat they were consuming or what protein they were consuming. So we can now know that with the help of analysis. At Kotla Badli in Kutch, the only evidence of protein is from that site, where a potsherd is analyzed, and they have found dairy residue of protein, that is dairy, from that particular pot. So we know now with scientific proof. Earlier it was not that we didn't know, but now we know more with the scientific evidence that they were consuming dairy, and they probably were making cheese. That's what the study have suggested. But as we go forward, if we do more analysis, we can also know about various other protein and fats, and also about the you know what sort of protein and what fat they were consuming. We don't know that yet, so we can have much more scientific evidence, or conclusive evidence to the dietary practices.
Right. As like there is so much more that I want to ask, but we're short on time. Due to the paucity of time, I think I'll ask you two more questions. First, not two. You can club it as one. I think what I want to know is that you have been talking about how the colonial perspectives have shaped traditions in or conventions in archaeology and history in India. So how have these shaped the conventions? How have they shaped opinions, and have they been revised now? And secondly, is that what, in your opinion, as an archaeologist, are the most crucial or important inquiries that should be done to, deepen our understanding about ancient India as a whole?
See, colonial perspective is very strong, but I think with time it is fading away because the evidence are going against the initial colonial perspective. Uh, and I think slowly and steadily people are moving away. But my worry is that if people move away, they might move away to the very extreme right as well, which is not right, because we cannot have the two opposing poles and then think that it has to fill in this compartment and only this. So that is my biggest worry as an archaeologist. Colonial perspective is also very deep, or colonial practices in archaeology are very deep. We even in our undertakings, but today with the help of globalization, and by collaborating with various institutions across the globe, we are slowly and steadily coming out of those practices. For instance, the way excavation was undertaken by Wheeler or Marshall, we no longer excavate like that. Our perspective is not only to gather antiquities. Our aim today is to collect data, so to fill the to answer the research question. So there is a big shift now into why we excavate. It's not to just fill up our storerooms and make the laundry list. It is to basically answer important, pertinent questions regarding our past. So it's a very, very important shift that I see recently. And like example of Kotla Badli is one of that. Usually pottery is just thrown, or pottery is recorded and just kept. But the reason why we were able to get a protein sample or residue is because you have to take samples on site with the context, which means that you have to document it in a very different way, as opposed to what Wheeler has initially taught us a few decades ago. So there is a very big shift in practice today in Indian archaeology that I see. Yeah, and what was your next question? I forgot.
Is that what do you think should be done in this area, like to get a deeper understanding of the ancient Indians or ancient India? What more can be done?
The first is funding. We are with no money, whatever. And people ask us questions, important questions that need to be answered, but all of it takes money. And funding for archaeological work is not only low, is way below that level also. It's way below. A lot of people say because it's not needed. Why should we fund an archaeological research, or why should we give more money to archaeological research? Because, why should we look at the past? But then when people have to talk about their ancestry and they talk about their heritage, they boast with so much of confidence, and this is where we belong, this is where we belong. So if they want conclusive answers, they have to fund the research. So biggest thing that I think can lead us anywhere is funding, especially the domestic funding. Could be private funding, could be anything. Please give us money so we can do more work. The next thing is inclusion of a lot of scientific analysis, and which again requires a lot of money. So I think money can solve all our problems.
That is actually something that I think a lot of fields face, not just archaeology, especially in the Indian context. But thank you so much for so much information that we could gather, starting from how and when can we actually start the period of early Indians, which is not just limited to the civilization, the start of the civilization, which goes back so many thousands of years back to when the African dispersal took place, and how and why is Indus Valley Civilization, or actually the Harappan Civilization, as the archaeological convention goes, the Harappan Civilization was an enigma in archaeology, or let's say history. Then we also got to know that the trade links that were there with the contemporary civilizations. Disha also talked about how the script has been undeciphered yet, and a lot of other things that we came across, the importance of pottery, especially that just now we were talking about, and the sites that she has excavated, Sinauli, Rakhigarhi, how a small site like Binjor can give us so much information about not just the said characteristics of a civilization, but there is no laundry list, as she says, to check off that you can call a civilization. In that sense, we also came to know how there was not the decline of the people, as we put it, but there was a decline of a culture, and then these people adapted to other places, and then they brought up new cultures, perhaps. At the end, also, we came to know how the colonial perspectives are affecting our perceptions about Indian archaeology and Indian history, even as we enter 2023. But I think we had a very informative session, and we would like to thank Disha Ahluwalia for this very, very informative session. And at the end, would you like to say something to our viewers that you would want to say?
First of all, thank you so much for giving me this platform, because it's very important to address few issues that are there in the public domain, especially the questions. People are always curious about what archaeologists do and how archaeologists investigate a site, or what is basically our past when we talk about archaeological data. There, I have seen that, and it's no one's fault, that there is a lack of knowledge in the public domain. And through your platform, and if we are able to put few points across, even 1 or 2 points across, and that goes into circulation and become part of conversation, that is a win-win situation for all of us. So that's what I need. That's what I want. And I think it's time that with advancement of social media technology and everything, we sort of go out and discuss this in public domain whatever we can, but at least connect with the public. It's very important, and I want to thank you all, giving me this platform to do that. And it has been really interesting. I got to brush up all my all my notes.
It was actually our pleasure to have you here on our platform. We got to know so much about so many things that again, like you've said, are being publicly discussed but without any conclusion. And thank you so much for taking your time out for us. And I would like to tell our viewers that you can watch this session on our YouTube platform, where you'll also find hundreds of other such informative debates and discussions. And thank you again, Disha. We hope to have you here again.